Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is going down the rabbit hole or down the rabbit hole. And what we're going to talk about is how once we start doing intense work on ourselves, we often find how much more work there is to do or that is available to us. So what an adventure, right? But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, and creating a brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Rub those palms together, feel the friction and the temperature and the tension and the pressure there. And as you release your hands, feel all that energy and tingling, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So down the rabbit hole, it's so interesting. It's a phenomena that I see happening over and over with clients where we do a lot of deep work. And then after an extended period of time, things arise that have been perpetual, that have been long-standing, but that have been either so present that they weren't noticed, or so deep that it took uncovering all kinds of other stuff before we got to the point where we could even recognize the need for this other work. And I find it endlessly fascinating how I think what happens is that we get to a point of greater and greater awareness or clarity or strength or balance or integration, that as we reach these more developed, can we say, more aware levels of being, that then and only then can we recognize some other dynamics. Then and only then do we have the strength of maybe ego, maybe, like integrated ego, the strength to be able to look at some of these deeper dynamics. And I've seen it even in myself, that as I grow and develop, that I'm better equipped to look at certain patterns, that I can see certain things without flinching, whereas in the past I would have just completely pushed those things away and turned away from addressing them and owning them, being present to those dynamics, or those patterns in myself. So I'm wondering for you, what are this is such a great question, and it was brought up by somebody that I was working with again yesterday. And they actually brought up the question, saying that they often ask themselves, what is it that they're pretending not to know? And we've talked about that in the context of trusting our gut, and then pretending that we don't know what we know, because we don't trust our gut. We override it, and then we have consequences to pay. And we pretend that we didn't know, but we did. But when we look at ourselves, there's a lot that I think we pretend not to know. And maybe it's because at different points in our lives, the reflection of what we're seeing is just we're too connected to it to be able to look at it from a vantage point where we could really potentially see how to shift it. We're like go through a denial phase. So that's what this rabbit hole is about, is that as we get deeper and deeper, it gets deeper and deeper. The more growth we have, the more growth we get to do, kind of thing. It's kind of like when you start cleaning the house, you start noticing corners that you didn't even realize were there sometimes, like when you start cleaning up, then you start noticing all the places that have not had the attention that they need, or that they could use. We tend to live with circumstances as they are, and when we start addressing, it's like so many projects that we take on take so much longer than we anticipate them to take, partly because we're not fully cognizant of the depth of what's there, right? Like we're not, until we get into it, we don't really see how big a project it is. And maybe that's a blessing, right? So it's interesting to see how this personal growth stuff percolates up as we evolve. That as we're starting to let go of stuff in our environment or in our personal matrix, as we start to let go of things, other things come to our awareness, other things percolate up. And so one situation was with someone who had this very, very profound, pervasive pattern of self-beat up. And you might be able to relate to that. Lots and lots of us have those kinds of patterns where we just beat the heck out of ourselves at every turn, and somehow believe that it's beating ourselves up that keep us in line, that keeps us in line, because if we're compassionate to ourselves, or if we're generous or kind with ourselves, then who knows how we might just completely run amok, right? So there was this tremendously pervasive pattern of self-beat up and self-criticism and trying to keep oneself in line. And now we're finally, and it's been a while, we're finally moving beyond that to notice that underlying that was Good morning, Bernadette. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. We're going down the rabbit hole, particularly of self-development, and noticing how as we go deeper and deeper, there's deeper and deeper to go. In other words, that as we start clearing up some things, that it exposes other things that call for our attention. So underneath this pattern of self beat up was another pattern of self-denial. So the self-denial is more insidious in a way, because self beat up is overt, but the self-denial is not accepting or not recognizing one's nature, to be shuffling away feelings. It's a more subtle mode of self beat up, because it's saying it's not okay to have the feelings I have. It's not okay to be a sensitive person. It's not okay to be naive or emotional or whatever it is, so then there's this level of denial, and also along with that comes denial of our skills and abilities. And so I think this is a really important thing to be looking at, because the more and more I think about it, the more and more I believe, and it is one of my working hypotheses. The more and more I look at it, the more I believe that we've each come here with unique gifts, and that it's our highest fulfillment to be fulfilling those gifts. And if we deny those gifts, or we sequester them away, or we don't value them, then we don't express them. And then we're not fulfilling what we came here to be and do, I think. So anyway, Bernadette says, rabbit holes tend to remind of things we thought we dealt with. In fact, we just pushed them aside. Yep. The years and lifetimes of pushing things aside. We're conditioned to do that, right? Like when we go through a crisis, we're conditioned to just power our way through. Heaven forbid we break down. The thing that we get to know is that it takes, when we have a structure that's built on sand, we have to take down that structure to be able to rebuild, or we need to figure out how to build in a foundation. And that structure won't stand. It's shaky on sand, right? So we have to break it down. We break it down to build it back with a stronger foundation. And that's what often happens to us. But rather than allowing ourselves to do that, and sometimes we can't, sometimes circumstances don't allow for that, that breakdown. So we put it aside and we keep building on that shaky structure. And at some point, we get to deal with it. And that's where this rabbit hole thing comes in too, because hopefully we're dealing with stuff on this level, and that is giving us strength, kind of feeding into a foundation that then allows us to be uncovering this other stuff that is calling for our attention. And it's a beautiful thing to recognize as we evolve Yeah, Bernadette says, like walking on quicksand. Yeah, good luck with that, right? I think that that would be a challenging art to master, is walking on quicksand. And it often feels like that's what's happening, like at any moment, the foundation might give way. And so doing the work is not like this one person said to me, like, we've been working for all this time and now I'm seeing all these things that need to be worked on, that I didn't even know were there, that it seems like it's getting worse. And I think that that's actually an important interpretation to look at, that, oh my gosh, there now I see there's so much work to do. It's getting worse. And we often say, it gets worse before it gets better, but is it worse to recognize what's always been there that you just didn't see? Is that actually worse? Maybe it feels more overwhelming. Maybe it feels more distracting, or maybe it feels big. But I see that as a really positive evolution, to be recognizing that, to be able to recognize, oh my gosh, look at this dynamic, look at that dynamic. And we can sort of start teasing those things apart bit by bit, step by step. I think that that kind of recognition is a recognition on the way to greater wholeness. I just last night, in fact, was laying in bed trying to sleep, and started being revisited. I'm saying being revisited because I wasn't on an active search, being revisited by certain dynamics in past relationships, and looking at those dynamics and able to look at them without feeling like I just wanted to crawl in a hole and die, just without the shame and blame, but to be able to just look at those things and say, wow, what is underneath that? Bernadette says, it's only worse if we still choose not to deal with it. Yep, that's true. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but I have definitely experienced deep shame and guilt and resignation and all kinds of emotions like that, that in the past made it very difficult to confront some of these personal dynamics. And so, looking at these past relationships and dynamics in those relationships was very, very interesting. And I suspect that the place from which I'm able to perceive them now will open greater doors for understanding, to me, within me, for me to understand me and what was at play, and how to be able to move into new possibility in relationships, how not to carry forward those same dynamics, those same patterns, to be able to discover more of what was at the seed of those experiences and patterns, and to recognize what's changed along the way. So I think that we get to deal with things on so many different levels at different times in our lives, based on our own personal evolution, where we've come to, where we've grown to. And it's true that the more capable we are, the more shows up for us to address. You would think that all this stuff goes, you get all this stuff out of the way, and then you just get to cruise, right? Then you get to coast. Not. Not. We get to actually be able to approach things from a different place, hopefully a higher level, that then maybe it's easier to find our way through. Maybe it's easier to have compassion for ourselves as we move through. Bernadette says, how do you deal with the dynamics of what has happened and how you have changed to receive the same outcome? I'm not sure I understand. Let's see. How do you deal with the dynamics of what has happened and how you have changed to receive the same outcome? So I'm interpreting what you're saying, Bernadette, as to be able to make peace with something that's happened in the past, perhaps. So by looking at the dynamics, I knew that. So I made the correction. There was a typo that I corrected in what Bernadette had written. So I think that we can. Here's an example. I see these examples with my clients all the time. So here was an example where someone had really felt distanced from I had felt really unsupported by family, and I had a lot of resentment and hurt around not having been supported. And by looking at it in a different way, they were able to recognize, wow, it wasn't that they weren't supporting me, it's that they were going through their own stuff and trying to survive. And what happened as a result of this shift of perspective was that there was a greater compassion for the experience of the other people going through whatever they were going through. And out of that came a forgiveness. It wasn't that they decided that they all of a sudden wanted to pursue richer, intimate relationships necessarily with family members, but that the blame and the resentment and the anger dissipated because they looked at it from a different vantage point. They weren't looking at it from the vantage point of this was done to me. They looked at it more from the vantage point of the bigger picture, the broader dynamics about like what else was going on and what was going on beyond my experience. These people were struggling with their own lives and didn't have the resources, couldn't find the resources to be able to provide the support that the person really needed at the time. So there are ways that when we revisit circumstances of our lives, we can gain a different perspective that shifts our internal experience, even though the same thing, the same history is there. It's a different vantage point or of that history, a different interpretation. So it's kind of the same outcome in its way, in that the situation, the facts of the history didn't change, but the interpretation of the facts did, or a broadening of the facts occurred as well. So this is all part of that rabbit hole, all kinds of tunnels down there, boy. We can go in so many different directions. And when we feel wronged, we can gain a new perspective on that wrong by considering the vantage point of the other parties involved. And it doesn't necessarily justify. I mean, say an abuser, someone who has been an abuser, they were abused. It can provide a richer understanding of where it came from. It doesn't excuse the abuse. It makes the whole story a deeper, more complex story. It doesn't necessarily alleviate the wounds of the personal abuse suffered, but it maybe can create a richer sense of understanding and compassion, perhaps. So that's today's conversation on the rabbit hole. And I so appreciate your being here and listening and engaging and being willing to have these conversations, being willing to look more deeply, being willing to expand our capacity for awareness and understanding. And when we do that together, we rise together. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I encourage you to check out the wonderful programming on Enlightened World Network, Enlightened World Living, and EWN, One with the Earth. And Bernadette says, some situations I will never understand, LOL. You know what, Bernadette? I'm kind of right there with you. There are certain vantage points that I don't understand despite my efforts. And I'm more willing now than I have ever been, I guess, to try to understand different perspectives, but I guess I have a ways to go. So with that, so much love. You too, Bernadette, have a wonderful day, as to everyone else. And yeah, enjoy the rabbit hole. Until next time, hope to see you again here really, really soon.